All right. So if you saw it in that little blurb, I am going to be one of the moderators today. My name is Nina Patel. But as everyone starts joining in on the webinar, if you could please, in the chat box in the corner, send out your name, introduce yourself, and your university and country that you're calling in from. So just go ahead and type that into the chat box so we can see who's tuning in.
Yeah, and hi everyone. My name is Jenny Guzman, and I'm another campus director for the Arizona State University cohort for the Millennium Fellowship. And we're really excited today to have everyone and be able to hear from a really great speaker.
Hello everyone, this is Lopa Banerjee calling in from UN Women.
Hello. Yeah, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome you to the 5th Millennium Fellowship Webinar featuring Ms. Banerjee, so Director of Civil Society at UN Women. So thank you for joining with us today, and yeah.
All right, so to begin, for the next 45 minutes, we will first be having a moderated dialogue, and then 15 minutes of asking Ms. Banerjee to talk about her experiences. And then for that remaining 30 minutes, we'll open it up to Q&A so that we can have some of the other tuning in members to ask their own questions to Ms. Banerjee as well. So please remember to mute yourself if you're not speaking so that there's no background noise throughout the webinar. And then again, if you're just tuning in with us, feel free to introduce yourself within the chat box. With your name, where you're coming from, and which university. And then with that said, Jenny, would you like to start off the moderation?
Yeah, so Lopa Banerjee is the Director of Civil Society Division at UN Women. She leads UN Women's work on partnering with, supporting, and strengthening women's rights and civil society networks, as well as her contribution, participation, and influence in policy discussion at global, regional, and national levels. So Lopa's work focuses on partnership development with civil society organizations to influence global action on gender equality, in particular related to standard setting, policy discussion, and stakeholder accountability. She leads UN Women's strategic engagement, advocacy, and alliance building initiatives with women's and human rights groups, social justice actors, and stakeholders including faith-based constituencies, men and boys groups, trade union movement, youth groups, among others, to promote intersectional partnerships for gender equality. So she's doing everything, you guys. So regardless of what your project is, I can guarantee you, you're going to find something that's going to connect to her work for sure. So yeah, so let's go ahead and get started.
Hi everyone, wonderful to be here. This is Lopa Banerjee, and did you want me to start off?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, it's really wonderful to be here. And thank you so much for deciding to spend your valuable time with me. So thank you very much. And I want to start by thanking the Millennium Campus Network and the United Nations Academic Impact for launching the Millennium Fellowship. This is really important, you know. Young people's leadership in different spaces is crucial for all of the work that everybody is doing on enabling the world to be a better place, particularly at this moment when things are bleak in many parts of the world. But it is young people's hope, aspirations, activism, and strength of belief that actually keeps our hopes alive and our attention focused. So thank you very, very much for the work that you do. And the fact that all leadership, and particularly young leadership, is a commitment to lead with empathy, humility, and inclusion. These must be guiding values because, you know, there is no leader without a follower. And therefore, the recognition of followers, the collaboration that everybody is in this together for shared public good, for shared values and aspirations. That is meaningful, and that signals that nothing in the world can be achieved alone, And most definitely, as far as the Sustainable Development Goals are concerned, that is an all of society enterprise. It is an all of the world aspiration, and therefore it can only be achieved with everybody's participation and leadership.
Thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to have you with us here today. And so if we could just jump right in and get started with some of the questions that we have. The first one that we have is, a lot of your work focuses on partnership development with civil society organizations. So I guess, could you tell us how you go about creating those partnerships and alliances? And for the second part of the question, how do you mobilize different entities to take action towards gender equality?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The work, any partnership work, is about mutuality. And so when we talk in terms of working with different actors, organizations, individuals, it is about, first of all, recognizing that our work is shared, our aspirations are shared, particularly with regard to gender equality. Now, gender equality is, again, it's about equality overall. It's not just about women and girls. Mm-hmm. This is an idea of the world and the way we want the world to be, with every human being having the opportunity to express their aspirations and having the ability to live the way they would want to, in collaboration with each other, so that each individual's life is valuable, but then the lives of all of society are valuable as a collective. So with that in mind, when we work on partnerships, we focus very clearly on making sure that our approach to partnerships is intersectional, that it is not just about the fact that we are working with women and girls, or we're working with men and boys, or we are working with trade unions, or we're working with governments. It is about the fact that a society is multiple actors who are all contributing to make it work. And therefore, issues are also not addressed in silos. If you're talking about race, then it has a relationship with gender. If you're talking about gender, it has a relationship with class. If you're talking about class, it has a relationship with poverty. If you're talking about poverty, it has a relationship with the environment. If you're talking about the environment, it has a relationship with governance. If you're talking about governance, it has a relationship with democracy. So everything is interrelated. Yeah. And so we adopt that intersectional approach to partnerships, and being very clear that we are able to work with those that otherwise do not have the opportunity to participate in discussions that affect their lives. So that's one part of it, that we make sure that our partnerships are intersectional. It's also crucial that our partnerships allow for intergenerational conversations. The world has the largest population of young people today, but the older people or the more experienced people have not all died. They are still there. They're still making decisions, but their decisions are, it's crucial that their decisions are informed by the views of those that form the largest part of the world. So intergenerational partnerships are crucial. And then recognizing that we are in a world today where debate, dissent, challenging those that are in power to hold fast to their commitments, accountability for stakeholders, for leaders, all of this is being severely challenged. The ability of groups to exercise their views are challenged if they don't form a narrative that is maybe that which is being promoted by governments or administrations. So the space for civic and democratic activity is challenged. And therefore, for organizations like ours, it is crucial that we take very deliberate actions so that that space is not only preserved, but it is strengthened, and that those actors who face barriers are given the opportunity to overcome those barriers. So those are some of the approaches that we adopt in our partnerships, essentially to facilitate, to catalyze engagement across at all levels, at national levels, at regional levels, at global levels, at community levels, and so on.
Thank you so much. I believe Jenny has the next question, which I think transitions quite nicely.
So thank you for mentioning the intergenerational aspect of our networking relationship building experience. I think it's a very great way for the Millennium Fellows to relate and make that tangible connection as to what you were talking about. And it's also a great lead into the following question. So as we know, there are more young people in the world today than ever before. From your experience, how can we as youth be advocates for gender equality, and how can we help amplify and advocate for women's rights around the world?
So as I was saying that, gender equality is not something you do on one day, and environmental justice is something you do on the second day, and labor rights is something you do on the third day. Gender equality is about liberation. It is about freedom. It is about equality for all, because gender equality looks at how power is structured in society so that some people exercise it and other people are excluded from it. And this is centuries of social behavior, institutional behavior that has entrenched these institutional structures and norms and cultures and stereotypes that continue to perpetuate these power structures. So gender equality is about challenging these power structures, about disrupting, destroying these power structures, and transforming cultures so that equality is shared, power is shared, so that everybody is equal. Therefore, gender equality is something that is cross-cutting. So anybody who is an activist who is working on social justice is working on the idea of equality. And therefore, it's something that you do every day of your life. In whatever it is that you work on, you are addressing access, ability, opportunity for individuals to live their lives as equals, as in the shared idea of public good, in a shared idea of global good, so that everybody thrives. And that is gender equality. Specifically for gender equality and women's rights, the idea is that there has been over the years these entrenched structures of patriarchy, because women are half the world. So if you are able to withhold power from half the world, then the other half of the world is deeply and profoundly privileged. And therefore, but privilege comes at a cost, because privilege is also about certain kinds of norms that restrict and bind. So it's not just that women are prevented from being their full selves, it's also that men are prevented from being their full selves. They too are locked into stereotypes of the provider, of the caregiver, or the caretaker, and women are locked into the receiver and the caregiver, and so on, and many other such stereotypes. And therefore, unshackling those stereotypes creates opportunities for everybody. So overall, working on gender equality, working on women's rights is an intersectional approach. It is something that you look at across different sectors, and you approach equality, therefore, from the approach of challenging power and privilege. that said, specifically as far as UN Women is concerned, we have going forward 2 clear opportunities. One is the Commission on the Status of Women, which is the largest global framework. The Commission on the Status of Women is the largest global convening that brings together gender equality advocates from all over the world in New York to discuss priority areas for social change. And we work with young people to bring young people to this conference. It takes place every year in March, and it will take place next year in March as well, in 2019. And there is a youth dialogue that happens where we work with young people. Many young people come, we facilitate their participation. And these young advocates take part in the event and present their recommendations to governments for what they see as their issues on the particular topic that the Commission is discussing. And next year, they will be discussing the issue of social protection, which, as you know, is at the heart of how governance systems can provide opportunities for all people in a country, for all for all those who live in that country. So that's one. And then the second point is the preparations and commemoration and celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which was adopted in 1995 at the 4th World Conference on Women. That will complete 25 years in 2020. And the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action is, if you will, the Bill of Rights for the women of the world. It's a Bill of Rights for equality. And governments made commitments to achieve certain conditions for equality. And while there has been a lot of progress, progress has been weak, it has been inconsistent, it has not been sustainable, and in fact, in many areas, we've seen regression, whether that is in the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights, on other issues of sexuality rights, on violence, on equal participation in the labor force, on migrant and refugee and other issues of marginalization. So there are multiple areas where there are huge gaps. So through the next 2 years, we would like to work with young people to create, to support and strengthen a movement of young feminists, men and women, and everybody in between, driving that agenda for equality, so that from leading up to 2020, and then from 2020 to 2030, but with a catalytic point at 2025. So the next 5 years are the crucial years where we can make a real impetus towards achieving equality for the young people of the world who are at present now and who will be the leaders going forward. So a real focus on driving an agenda and a movement of young feminists working towards the 2020 commemoration of Beijing, and that will also be the 5th year mark for the SDGs. And so a real assessment and a galvanization going on to 2025 and then on to 2030, which sees the end of the SDGs, so that we don't come to the end of the SDGs saying, oops, we didn't achieve gender equality. So to prevent that, we look at the next 15 years as a driver with young feminists leading the charge.
Thank you. I think those were some really great points. And so I think transitioning from here, I would love to open it up to the Millennium Fellow that are attending into this webinar. And so with that said, speaking to the Millennium Fellows that are attending, if you could please, in that chat box, feel free to, if you have any questions, type them into there with your name, your location, and which university you're attending. But like I said, for the next 20 minutes, we're going to open up the conversation to everyone tuning in to ask their questions for Ms. Banerjee on the line.
Also, everyone, make sure you send it to everyone so we can see it instead of just one person. That way we are able to filter everything and make sure everything is great. Awesome. Cool. So I actually had a question. So you touched on this briefly, but you mentioned that we have seen some regression in progress regarding women's rights. So what are you seeing young people do effectively in battling this regression, and what should we keep working on, especially as, you know, the future generation?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. You know, young people have taught us, those us older people or more experienced people, how to work across binaries. You know, young people don't recognize binaries, and they work across new and less formal organizational forms. How you engage, how you actively work across the political, the economic, the social and spheres. You almost transgress across these different spheres, and you use transgression as a principle of mobilization, and that is a really fantastic leadership and mobilization principle. And so that boldness that you bring when you do that creativity that you bring when you don't recognize binaries, these are the kinds of things that are necessary to address the binariness that is holding civic space to ransom. The reason why civic space is being held to ransom is through rhetoric and narratives of homogeneity, majoritarianism, some people deserve to have more than others, creating the us and them, creating, this kind of polarization. But the way you work, the way you mobilize, the way you live your lives, the way you engage, you absolutely disregard these boundaries. And so for you, living and activism is joined at the hip. And that is the way we will address the polarization and address the expansion of the space, because you don't recognize boundaries. And that's the way to destroy the boundaries that are being placed around participation.
Thank you. I think we actually have a question. Rose from Alma College, would you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, so my question is kind of focused on, you were talking about this intergenerational connection between younger generations and older generations. But why do you think younger people are just now becoming more active, specifically in gender equality? Or do you think it's just that they are now being able to have the opportunity to speak up?
I want to say that I don't necessarily agree that young people are not active in gender equality. If you look at people in different parts of the world, if you look at what has happened in the United States, the women's marches were intersectional, intergenerational marches. People came from everywhere. Young people, older people, men, boys, children joined those marches. There was a real recognition that there are multiple layers of discrimination that people are facing, and particularly young women are facing. And that was all brought into the Women's March. The Women's March became a catch-all for multiple kinds of justice issues. We've seen young people at the head of the anti-gun movement in this country. Young people are leading the Black Lives Matter mobilization in this country. If you look at other countries and other parts of the world, in Latin America, the Ni Una Menos campaigns, not one more woman dead of violence. again, young people are side by side with the older feminist activists, or let me say the more traditional feminist activists. So I don't agree that young people are not mobilizing. I think that people, social justice struggles. So, for example, if you look at the Black Lives Matter, now Black Lives Matter doesn't necessarily call itself a gender equality or a women's rights campaign, but it is fundamentally about addressing intersectional discrimination around race, class, and gender. The gun violence, again, it doesn't call itself a women's rights campaign, but it is about violence against everybody and violence against women and girls. So I think it's also how you frame it, and this is what I was saying earlier, that recognizing, and it is important to talk about rights, women's rights, equality, social justice as a comprehensive and intersectional approach, because only then will you address the multiple layers of discrimination that people face and women and girls face, because women and girls remain the most discriminated. But if you address the multiple layers of discrimination through these multiple lenses, then you are able to actually then you are working on gender equality and women's rights.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think we've had a huge wave of questions, so we're going to try to get as many as possible, but we're going to go in order. So we actually have a question from one of the people in our cohort. It's really exciting. So Chantel, if you want to go ahead and say your question. Okay, Chantel, are you unmuted? Okay, go ahead and
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. So my question is, what do you think of this whole debate of cultural relativism when it comes to international women's rights and international human rights as a whole? Do you think it's just a discourse that has been created to keep all these systems of oppression in place, or do you think it's actually legitimate? And what do you think of? What do you think of, or what do you think is the future of international human rights, especially when it comes to women? Because we have all these debates coming out and all these excuses coming from governments saying, "Oh, we have had this culture for a long time," or "This is what defines us as a people." But now, when it gets to a point where it's affecting women, is it just a discourse? Is it legitimate? What do you think?
Thank you. Very, very good and very important question. Let me ask you, is there any culture in the world at its core, whether it's culture, whether it is religion, any culture or religion in the world that says we are going to be oppressive or not recognize the humanity of some other people? That we will only prioritize some people over other people. At its core, no culture says that, because culture is about all of the people who benefit from it. What is done is that the role of culture is taken over or co-opted by politics, by political groups, by government who are promoting certain agendas, by political leaders who are promoting agendas, by male religious leaders, male cultural leaders who wish to promote and hang on to certain structures of power. So culture is used as an instrument to continue to promote unjust systems of power and patriarchy that support, political sort of goals and objectives. Exactly. Political goals and objectives, which in any case are marginalizing other people. So that this nexus of culture, politics, and power. And in today's context, the whole discussion around security and national sovereignty, this has become a toxic mix. And it is very deliberately used by those that have a polarizing agenda. It is deliberately used by populist leaders because of that polarizing agenda. And so the argument and the narrative that we must be able to promote is that there is no culture at its course. So from within culture, from within faith-based systems and institutions, the principles of equality and egalitarianism, which are at the heart of all culture and all faith, those narratives need to be amplified, and there are enough of those narratives happening. There is a lot of work going on within faith and religion around feminist interpretations. There is a lot of work going around within cultural spaces to ensure the universality of culture. And fundamentally, the international human rights system recognizes very much the role of culture in creating equitable systems of engagement across peoples. And that's what we need to keep evoking. That's what international human rights systems were created by all countries, not by one country or by a group of countries. And all countries have signed on to it as their constitutional principles. And that's what we need to evoke. And that's what we need to use, both from a governance perspective, but also from a culture creation perspective. And we need to be working with media, with art, with advocacy around art, media, around, popular culture to really push back against this narrative of relativism.
Awesome, thank you so much. And we have another question. So this question is from Anadge. So if you can go ahead, from the University of Benin. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello, ma'am. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. I can hear you.
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay. My question is this: in some public health sector or institution in Nigeria, some persons ask, or women are asked to pay more for male babies than as compared to female babies, and this invariably means there's a gender inequality trend. So how do I, as an individual, stand as an agent for a positive change in addressing such situation?
I'm not quite clear. I got your question. Are you saying that there's sex selection, or that there is boy-child preference? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so these are two things, right? I mean, they're related, but you're saying that there is sex selection. Initially, are you saying that there is sex selection? People come in and would like to have the sex of their babies identified before their babies are born? Is that what you're saying?
No, ma'am. My question is that people are asked to pay more as a discharge fee for male babies after birth as compared to females, like the female babies.
People are asked, I'm sorry,
I may be able to facilitate a little more, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the case of Nigeria, it sounds like in public hospitals, people are forced to pay higher discharge fees for male babies as opposed to female. And so I guess the question is, in a situation like this, how do you promote and foster change?
So much. Thank you very much for that, for interpreting that question for me. So, this is a very interesting phenomenon, because in fact, typically what happens is male children are preferred, right? And so the idea of, because usually in most societies, including in Nigeria, there is the preference, there is inequality, and male boys have privilege over girls. But in this case, there's a very strange kind of not necessarily penalty, but preference being expressed for male children. So here's how dangerous this is. So on the surface of it, it seems that you are asking people to pay more for male children at the discharge rather than female children. And you would think that, therefore, people would want to have female children because actually then, the discharge costs are less. And so actually people are not going to want to have male children because the discharge costs are higher. You would think that that's the straight response. But in fact, what is happening is something much more subtle. Because what is happening is, right from the get-go, what you're saying is that the value of the life of the male is more than the value of the life of the female. So at the point of birth, with the discharge from hospital of the baby, you are already saying that, this is of greater value. So yes, you're paying a higher price, but what you are already putting in place is a principle and an outlook that says this is of higher value than this. So to respond to you, absolutely, this goes back to the issue of fundamental equality again. However it manifests itself, and in this particular case, it's manifesting itself in a very convoluted way, by asking for a greater price for discharge. So, but the point still is, it is going back to socially valuing one group of people more than the other. And what we are talking about is equality. When that child, the birth of a child, a wanted child, the birth of a wanted child is a cause for celebration. That child is you brought life into the world. Parents should be celebrating that. And so this goes back to the culture creation, the norm change, that equality is about girls and boys, that girls and boys can each of them contribute equally to society. The reason why boys are being, the discharge is higher and value is being placed higher is because boys are seen to be contributing more. But that's because girls are restricted from contributing more. And so it goes back to the equality discussion. And so to you, this is back to addressing fundamentally the breaking the stereotypes and addressing the fact that equality is a shared endeavor, and that girls and boys equally need the same opportunities and need to be valued in the same way right from the get-go. They're all human beings. In Nigeria, in different spaces, whether culturally or religiously, the idea in faith communities in Nigeria, the idea that all human beings are created in God's image. So God's image is not less in some and more in some. A lot of people in Nigeria who are people of faith, whether Muslim or Christian or indigenous faiths, use this argument, and it is an effective argument.
All right. Thank you. And so we're running a little short on time, but there are a few questions that go around kind of the central idea. And so within the last few minutes that we have, a few people had asked questions.
Sorry.
I'm back. I was muted for a second. So the last few questions that I've seen have been revolving around how do we engage young girls in particular. Someone was saying that they engage and educate young girls. And someone else had asked a similar question as well. But how do we engage young girls right from that get-go? What's the most effective approach? in doing so.
Right. And I think that, again, in terms of engaging young girls, there are a lot of programs. So that very specifically, there are, if you look at, there are organizations that have particular programs that are targeted to engaging young girls. So there are different organizations, whether it's, Plan International, there are global organizations, and then there are organizations also at local and national levels that work with young girls' engagement. But again, looking at the engagement of young girls, the idea is to create opportunities to ensure that young girls, their voices are heard. From a very young age, girls are doctrinated or conditioned to not speak, to be not assertive. Girls are trained to be not bossy, to be assertive, to be able to express their views, encourage different ways of building young girls' confidence, of building young girls' networks, solidarity, networks, sharing spaces. All of these are tactics of engaging young girls. And then there are organizations, organized ways in which young girls' engagement can be promoted. There are within the UN, there are many such spaces. The UN now has a youth strategy at the UN level. Different UN organizations have youth strategies. UNICEF has youth strategies. So if you go on to the UN websites, various UN organizations' websites, they have youth strategies. We, as I said, from UN Women, we work quite attentively with young people's leadership, including young girls' leadership. There are mentoring programs. I think mentoring programs are really important, not only older people to young people, but peer-to-peer mentoring is a fantastic way of creating networks and opportunities to give value to young girls' opinions. It must start by that, creating space to value young girls' opinions.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, awesome. This is all very inspiring, and I think we can all definitely leave today knowing that we are able to make that connection to the values you were talking about and finding that intersectional connection, which I think is very important, and we definitely need to keep working on. Our work is nowhere near done, but it's really good that we have leaders our age, your age, all ages, etc., moving forward and taking these values at heart. So it's really inspiring and really awesome. So thank you so much, Ms. Banerjee, for taking the time to share those experiences with us. And if you can go ahead and share with us in the chat box a way to contact you. I know we had so many questions that we didn't get to, so that way the fellows can reach out to you if you have any questions, if you have any other things you want to add, your social media, anything of the sort. If you could please share that in the chat box, that'd be really appreciated. Thank you.
I've just shared my email, and earlier I had shared my social media handle. I'm sharing it again. So you've got both my email and my social media handle. Feel free to get in touch with me. It was wonderful talking to all of you. And once again, congratulations for the work you do. And thank you for your leadership, for your passion, for your commitment. We stand on your shoulders.
Wow, thank you again. That was an amazing discussion, and I think it's a pleasure having you with us today. And so additionally, I would like to thank all the Millennium Fellows who joined us in this webinar today. And with that said, like Jenny said, there are so many questions that unfortunately we were not able to get to. And so feel free to reach out to Ms. Banerjee if you would like to ask some of those really insightful, thought-provoking questions. And then again, just as a reminder, our next and final webinar will be held Monday, November 19th. And it will be actually related to the Gates Foundation with Katie Strock. And you can register on the Millennium Fellows website, www.millenniumfellows.org. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Ms. Banerjee, for talking with us, with answering all of those amazing questions. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, and all the best to all of you.
Thank you.